So my research looks at artificial intelligence in news production practices. So particularly how these complex and opaque technologies are changing the way journalists work today. And I've gone out and spoken to journalists really to try and understand how they define AI, how they work with AI, whether it matters to them and how they make sense of it. That's the sort of evidence base that I've been using to create change in newsrooms, particularly in public service media, which are incredibly important organisations in our societies, sort of underpin those democratic functions that we expect. They inform citizens, and we want to make sure that our journalists understand and can critically analyse and assess new technologies as they come into the newsroom. So the research I've been doing has been helping news organisations understand their own journalists, where they're coming from, what they need, how they can be upskilled to deal with this in the future, mitigate the risks that come along with these technologies. Okay, so that's the holy grail of research for me. It's the driving motivation behind why I got into academic research in the first instance. So I think it's really important that we engage with communities, that we make sure that that evidence that we generate in academic research has a real impact in the world. And as a practicing journalist myself, I split my time between these two roles. And when I see the change that my work has inspired, when I see journalists in the newsroom really critically thinking about AI and taking the insights that we've developed into their practice, I think that's just makes everything worthwhile, to be honest. So responsible, ethical and effective journalism is key to the functioning of healthy democracies, but new and emerging technologies like algorithmic systems and artificial intelligence can be very disruptive to this. You can just think of, the mis and disinformation that's been growing in our societies, the risks and the implications of hyper-personalised news, those kinds of things, synthetic media, deep fakes. So we really need to, get a handle on these risks. So I work in close collaboration with journalists to leverage their expertise, to really get a grip on what these risks mean for our news organisations and for society more broadly, to make sure that the innovations that our technologists are developing work in the interests of society, so that those risks don't come about. Okay, so I'm a really big advocate of working closely with the communities where you want to have impact. So that means actually being there on the ground with the people who have that practical know-how, that day-to-day lived experience, and taking their insights and their priorities, seriously, bringing that back to your research. So, I've been on the ground with journalists, I've listened to what they've got to say, I've listened to their priorities, and I've taken that back into my research. And in fact, at times I've changed the direction of my research, maybe the methods or the way I'm engaging, in order to ensure that I have, as much influence as possible. So that's about making research work in the right place at the right time and for those people that you want to impact. So even the smallest interventions can actually have quite a big impact, and I think it's important to recognise that. So for me, directly, journalists have been, learning about these new complex technologies. They've been taking those learnings into their day-to-day practice, translating them into how they can work better. So, they can step back from the day-to-day pressures and actually have the time to discuss, to learn, and to develop, basically, professional development. So that's really important. But I also think there are other levels of impact that we're having here, because that builds, and then at an organisational level, with those groups becoming engaged, those communities of practice taking this forward, we see those impacts and those benefits grow. And in the news organisation more broadly, you'll see other stakeholders developing new strategies, new paths forward. So I think there's different levels at which we can see that impact. Eventually, that translates into broader society. So when our news organisations can better use these technologies and better report on these technologies, that's to the benefit of audiences and sort of citizens more broadly. So there's so much crucial, creative and important work that goes on, you know, behind closed doors sometimes over long, long periods of time that doesn't actually have direct, obvious impact in the world. And I think that we shouldn't let perhaps the academic, you know, impact agenda devalue that work. It's extremely important foundational work. But that said, I think communicating our work better and ensuring we work more closely with communities that we both research and want to have impact with is extremely important and can only be beneficial in the long run.